Hi there, my name is Dan Olmstead, and I'm an Extension Associate with the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program. I'm also the NEWA coordinator. I'm sorry I couldn't be here today, but I'd like to thank Mike Basedow and Dan Donahue for inviting me to present at the 2019 Eastern New York Fruit and Vegetable Conference. I'll be talking about NEWA tools and updates for New York apple production. So to begin, I'd like to point you all to the NEWA website, which you can get to on your smart devices, tablets, laptops, if you happen to bring them with you. It's newa.cornell.edu. And as I go through the presentation today, feel free to look around and see what we have as I describe different aspects to you. To give you a brief summary of what I'll be talking about, I'm going to discuss a lot of what goes into NEWA and how it works, and also why it's useful and what maybe sets it apart from some other stuff out there. Then I'm going to get right into fruit resources and more specifically apple uh, uh, disease management tools, and we'll jump out of the presentation and into the platform as I describe briefly how to navigate your way around and some of the useful features in each of our model types. Finally, I'll just spend one or two slides on what's coming up in the future for NEWA and what you can expect for the 2019 growing season and beyond. So I already mentioned I'm with the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program. Fruit production is only one area that our program supports. We do ornamentals, we do field crops, and so on and so forth. If you're interested in learning more about NYSIPM, you can go to our website, and we've got a lot of really useful resources. My colleague, Dr. Julie Carroll, has also put together a website at fruit.cornell.edu, where you can also find really useful resources for apple and fruit production. So what exactly is NEWA? If you think of your local meteorologist, he or she often talks about what's happening right now with the weather, what's happening in a couple days from now. If you were to look only at a temperature data point, say, oh yeah, it's 30 degrees this morning, I've got to get my kids out the door. Sometimes that's just not enough, because what a meteorologist will tell you is that, well, yes, it's 30 degrees, but we also have a quarter inch of freezing rain that you're going to have to scrape off your car. So if I don't have that forecast, I'm going to walk out the door thinking everything is good, and then I'm going to go, oh, darn it, I've got to spend 20 minutes scraping my car. So it's the same idea with NEWA. We take basic weather parameters and we combine it with several things. We use research and extension expertise, so human capital. We also use published research. We use web technology, and so on and so forth. And I'll get into that in another couple slides. But really what we're doing is we're asking ourselves, what is happening right now? What is happening in the very near future? So anywhere from 3 to 5 days out with a particular insect pest or plant disease. We're putting it in biological context. Like I was just saying, the meteorologist puts it in context of, I got to get my kids out the door. But we take that information and we say, all right, what does this mean for apple scab management? Or what does this mean for coddling moth? Should I be out scouting? And so on and so forth. uh, Another important point is that we're not looking at long-term forecasts, and we're not looking at climate trends, although it is a very important part of our farm management, because we are getting into this pattern of very extreme weather. But if you are interested in those climate type patterns, we do have a close working relationship with Climate Smart Farming, which is another program that uses weather information more in the area of climate to develop these types of models. So to summarize this slide, NEWA is really what I call a decision support system. And let me get into exactly what that is, because this is important as you continue to build your knowledge of what NEWA is, and as you continue to interact with it, it will help you understand what it takes to get that information to you. So when I say decision support system, it might seem very ambiguous, but what I've done is I've put up this word cloud that kind of visualizes the idea of a DSS, or a decision support system. All of the individual words that you see are important, maybe some more than others, but they all get at this kind of global idea of taking separate pieces of information and putting them together into something that has added value. So if we think specifically about NEWA, I've spent the past year or two really thinking about what the different um, components or aspects are that go into building a decision support system on NEWA. Uh, so this diagram, again, just visualizes what I'm talking about. So, we say, yeah, I got to go to NEWA and look at um, what it's recommending, uh, but what makes that possible? So I see it as having 7 different areas. We have software, hardware, database, certain actions that should be taken. We have expertise, that would be researchers and extension folks. We have certain inputs and outputs that are required. So this might be something that the end user provides, maybe a threshold number or a biofix date like um, blossom date. And then we have an output, the medium or the message. Is that, what do we do with that? So when you think about these different aspects, we use all these different parts to come up with apple diseases, apple insects, and crop management. Um, and so those are those outputs that use the hardware and software and so on and so forth. But then we also have the human beings, the brains that say, okay, this is what we need to do in all these separate areas to make it into an effective decision support system. And when it comes to the expertise, we have a number of people involved um, at Cornell who have done the legwork. And so that would be Julie Carroll, who a lot of you know, Dr. Kara Cox, who's in plant pathology and plant microbiology in Geneva, and then also Art Agnello, who is an entomologist with us on campus. In the past, there have been other folks involved, Harvey Reiseg and several other key people who have since retired, but for right now, those are the folks we think of when we're looking at these tools. And then I make a specific point to mention, our cooperative extension partners. So Mike Bastow, who invited me to do this presentation, Dan Donahue, and a lot of other folks in apple and fruit production across the state really make this system work because they're the boots on the ground. They're getting out there in front of you. They're taking this information. They're saying, yeah, you need to take action now. So something to keep in mind is that, this is not just a website. It's something that we at Cornell and Cornell Cooperative Extension are really working hard to provide for you. So if we go back to those circles I had in my visualization, I'll talk first about hardware. Um, I think some of the most obvious ones are weather stations. Um, since its inception, at least since the current website, the version that we're looking at now has been up. We've been a very strong partner with Rainwise Incorporated, so they have a nice out-of-the-box, ready-to-go weather system. You just turn it on, and there it goes. Now, I do want to mention this is not official or online yet, but we are going to start working with a second weather station vendor. We're not replacing Rainwise, but a lot of folks have expressed interest in having options. And I've had people come up unsolicited since I started, probably 25 or 30 people across the eastern US at conventions like this and elsewhere say, hey, I have an onset station, or if you were to work with onset, we would love to get involved with NEWA. So right now, Rainwise, coming soon, when we're talking about outdoor hardware, onset is going to be a second weather station vendor option. Other things that are hardware that are important to this system, maybe that aren't you don't immediately think of, are our smartphones or our computers. How are we accessing the website? Because without that hardware, we just cannot. NEWA would not work. So one last point I'll make about weather stations is that every one of these dots, this is the NEWA network, so to speak. And I've already touched on the fact that we're here to serve New York agricultural audiences, but what we do meets the needs of other folks, and so they pay us. But in total, we've got almost 700 of these grower-owned weather stations. People are making that investment because they see the payoff. Whether it's peace of mind or better IPM practices or reduced spray costs and so on and so forth. So hardware, just to drive the point home again, is one of the big foundations of NEWA. So something maybe that's more behind the scenes or that we don't think of right away is the type of software that we use to make everything happen. Some of these things that are on the screen right now, you'll recognize, we've got our web browsers, that's a software type. But we also have things going on behind the scenes, and especially, I'll mention in the last slide, with new ways to develop websites and make it easier to use and more user-friendly. There's a lot going on. When we talk about programming our models, there's other types of software that we use. So Python and React and GraphQL um, are really programming languages. That's how we are able to do the calculations and how to make things look nice, especially in NEWA 2.0, I'll call it. That's coming out sometime after the 2019 growing season. But again, stuff to just keep in mind. So we've talked about hardware and software, but what do we do with information that's coming from our weather stations, and how do we take that information and migrate it to our computers and run it through our programs? Well, that's where a database comes in, and so we have to have efficient ways of keeping those weather data points very organized. Then we get to action, and this is where we start to get into the absolute importance of not only our experts who are developing these things for us along with the programmers, but where you as the end user are directly interacting with our tools. So when I talk about action, um, it's something where, okay, the NEWA model tells me that I've reached 100 base 50 Fahrenheit degree days. And so it's telling me I need to take action by putting out a pheromone trap for such and such insect. That's an action. Another action would be, um, okay, I just applied streptomycin to treat my fire blight. I'm going to input that into the model. So that's, again, an action. So you get the idea. And in this slide, I just have a simple if-then statement that demonstrates from a programming perspective or from a technology perspective um, what would happen behind the scenes. Now, I just mentioned it, but expertise is I would say the most important part of this whole system, because you can have data till your heart's content, but if you don't know how to interpret that, or if it's interpreted the wrong way, it can lead to significant impacts and unfortunately negative impacts. So okay, so I've reached that threshold, um, and the model says, uh-oh, you have a high risk of something. Well, what am I supposed to do? So our researchers and our cooperative extension experts are the ones who say, based on my experience and from my extensive training, you should take such and such an action. And so that's all built in to the NEWA DSS. So input output, this ties in closely with actions, but in my mind, it's distinct enough to give it its own category. And so examples I have listed are crop stage, insect counts, disease observations. There's a lot more depending on what you're looking at. But it interacts with all these other components. And then finally, the medium message. This is where we get down to, okay, all these other parts have been talking to each other, but what do I actually do? And again, I have it as its own category, but it is closely linked to everything else in here, because we have to draw from all those different categories to get an accurate message to say, you need to get that fire blight treatment on right now, or you could have significant negative impacts. So again, going back to the idea of a decision support system, um, NEWA strives to provide the best and most timely information we can given available resources. What I like to think of at this point is that when we take all of those separate parts, we get at the end of the day, maybe if you're a grower, the season's done, you look at your books, you say, I've taken care of myself. We've made us a profit. I feel like I've made a good decision, or maybe I didn't make a profit, but from a business perspective, things are okay. Um, what we're trying to get is a synergy. So if you take any one of those pieces that I'm talking about in the NEWA decision support system by itself, you wouldn't get the same effect as having everything work together. So this is called a synergy. And just to illustrate this point, if you were to do 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, that's an additive effect. So if I have a weather station and maybe I call up my local extension person and maybe I go out and scout, those are all effective, but if you were to but if you don't consider them together and kind of take a holistic approach, you wouldn't get this synergy. So it becomes something more than each of the individual parts. So with all this in mind, what NEWA is really trying to do is develop resources that you as a grower really need and want. We don't want to create something that's hard to use or that you find frustrating, um, or anything like that. And so since I've started, and obviously Julie Carroll has always done this, is that we listen to you, whether it's something that's already on NEWA or again, I keep mentioning this rebuild, something that we want to do that maybe a lot of you folks or our extension colleagues are saying is needed, is from the beginning, let's get something started that's going to be useful. And so that's really our goal. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to, now that we have an understanding of what NEWA is and how we put things together, I want to speak specifically to the Apple insect tools that we have available online. And I'll start with insect pests. What I'll do in the next slide is just jump right to the live NEWA site, and I'll do a talk through and walk you through some of the features just in an example. I won't go through all of these, but it's the same principle for everything. So for insect pests, we have apple maggot, codling moth, oblique-banded leaf roller, oriental fruit moth, plum curculio, San Jose scale, and spotted tentiform leaf miner. And if you give me just a second, I will switch over. Okay, so if we go to newa.cornell.edu, you'll see that we have our main navigation bar here. So the first thing we're going to go over is an example of how to interact with our Apple insect tools. To get these, go to pest forecasts in the drop-down menu, and then select Apple diseases. We'll come back, or Apple insects. We'll come back to diseases in just a moment. So if you select Apple insects, it will take you to this interface here. On the left-hand side, you have this user input interface, and this is standard across all of our models. There are a bit of variation within what you're going to select, but at its base, you're going to select a certain parameter within the model. So in this case, it's an insect pest. But then you're always going to have the option to choose your state, and then the weather station within your state. And these are all dynamic. So if I were to select New Hampshire, for example, this list is going to change. So let's go back to New York and we'll run through an example insect pest model very quickly. So for this conversation, we'll use Albany, which is actually an airport location, but you can still access those as the same way as any of our other weather station locations. I'm going to go back in time. So if you are interested in this during the growing season, it will automatically populate this with the current date that you're accessing the model. But if you want to go back, say, to 2018, you can do that, and it will pull in historical data. So let's just say maybe May 22nd, and then for insect pests, I think I'll just choose codling moth. So let's see what happens here. So sometimes it takes a few minutes to load everything into the interface, uh, but we get this general output. So you're going to have the model name, and it'll say results for whatever station or airport you selected, and then it's going to give you this field for first trap catch. So for codling moth, it refers to pheromone traps that you're going to be using to scout for those early season populations. Um, then you get this sort of message across all the different insect models. So in this case, it's saying degree day accumulations estimate that first trap catch may not have occurred yet. So let's go ahead and jump forward to June 15th and see what happens. And that message hopefully will change because the model will have estimated um, that uh, codling moth populations have come out. So at this point, it says the model is using historical data to estimate this first trap catch as May 26, 2018. If you don't like this or you think it's not accurate, you have the ability to change it. So by default, it's going to put in a value, but always, jive this with what's happening on the ground as you're scouting and checking those pheromone traps. So assuming this is correct, what we have down here is basic output. We have daily degree day accumulation. You're going to see that this says base 50 BE. So this number here refers to that base temperature above which these heat units are going to accumulate for that insect. And so this is how we track development. It's based on published research, and Dr. Agnello, along with some of his colleagues who have since retired for these apple insect models, have worked on refining these calculations. But then we also have accumulation since January 1. So you'll see that these numbers always go up while daily degree day numbers fluctuate. These values, these accumulated values, are what the rest of the elements that you see here are based on. So depending on what this number is, the model is also going to estimate what the pest stage is. So this is another area where it will provide a starting point and say our best guess is that moth flight is peaking and that a majority of the eggs have hatched. So associated with this particular pest stage are these messages, and I call them dynamic messages because they will change depending on what the pest stage is, which in turn is based on how many degree days have accumulated. So at this particular stage, the status is that adult flights are relatively heavy, blah, blah, blah. And then this is really what makes NEWA unique, is that we've developed these pest management messages. So it's saying, well, okay, yeah, we're at stage X and the status is Y, but then what do you do with that? So these messages are really important. But in a nutshell, this is how all of these other apple insect models work that you see here, with some variation in what this base temperature is going to be, and then, when these messages are going to change and what the pest stages are. Okay, on to apple disease management. So for diseases in apple, we have apple scab, we have fire blight, and sooty blotch fly speck. And again, I'll do the same thing. Let me switch over. Okay, we've gone over how to use the apple insect models. So now quickly, I would like to give you an example of how the apple disease models work. So again, we're on the home page. If you go to pest forecasts and then go to this apple diseases option, we have the same interface, which I've explained how to interact with. And in this case, I think we're going to use Fireblight because that's a very popular tool. We're going to use the same location in New York, which is Albany. And then again, let's go back in time. I'm going to try May 15th again. And let's see what happens. Hopefully this is active and we can get some output. Yes, perfect. Okay. So again, quickly, this tells you what the model is, what location you're using. And with this model, we have some different types of end user fields that you can interact with. So by default, we have orchard blight history. Again, this is an estimate based on what the historical data is. And then we have an estimated first blossom open date. As I said with the apple insect models, you can change these. We have 3 different options for orchard blight history. And then you can change the date if you don't feel that's close to when blossom actually opened. To walk quickly through some of these outputs, we have 2 different types of risk assessments. We have this one, Cougar Blight 4-day DH, which is based on work done in Washington State, but then modified for the Northeast and New York in particular. So we're looking at, these are not degree day accumulations or degree hour accumulations, which is a common question, but this is based on how many colony forming units of the bacteria that causes fire blight have developed, and then there's some translation based on research, but more or less the higher the number, the more you should be concerned about taking action quickly. So on top of that, we also have wording that tells you it's a different way of sharing the same information, but depending on the range of these number values, this will also change. And then we have coloration, so multiple ways of expressing the level of attention that's deserved. The infection potential is based loosely on different elements of Mary blight, which is another model that's out there that looks at fire blight risk. So one's not better than the other, but the idea is to provide as many sources of information as possible when you make your decision. And again, it follows a similar type of setup. These numbers, the higher they are, the higher the risk level. They're calculated a little bit differently, but I would say that, if you see 2 red boxes and numbers are relatively high, you should definitely be considering action. Now, if you have specific questions about what these values mean or how they should be interpreted, reach out to folks like Mike Bastow and Dan Donahue or Julie Carroll here at New York State IPM. They are the experts who can help provide additional interpretation with that. Having mentioned that, if we go down here, much like the apple insects modeling options, we have these dynamic messages that are generated. So instead of pest status and pest management, we have disease cycle and disease management. And you get the idea. So these will change depending on what the output is up here throughout the growing season. The one other thing that we have in addition to these 2 adjustable fields is that down here, when you do make an application, you can enter that date. So if we're looking at May 15th, 2018, let's say we made a spray on that date just to see what happens. So May 15th, and as soon as you do that, we should see some changes in the model output. So here we go. So this is when we made the spray. So obviously when you do that, the risk is pushed down considerably. Now we're in a really highly favorable time of year when the bacteria is going to continue developing. So the effect of that spray isn't extended out very far, but you can see that the model does adjust itself um, to making that application. So in summary, this is how fire blight is used. We also have apple scab and sooty blotch fly speck. They have different types of adjustable inputs, different types of output, but they are all built to provide some level that of risk to indicate whether management is needed. And again, talk to your local extension folks or other experts at Cornell or NYSIPM, or even your local county extension office if you're interested in learning more specifics about how to do these. And then finally, we have Apple crop management tools. These really break out into a few smaller categories, but I have them all listed in one here. We have for yield management, we have the Apple carbohydrate fruit thinning model. Some people refer to it as Melisym or the CHO model. And then we do also have a new tool um, that Dr. Greg Peck has developed down in Ithaca called the Apple pollen tube growth model. These are really two different ways um, to get at achieving that ideal crop load early in the season. So just in the last minute or two, I want to touch on two particular topics. The first is, what are NEWA's strengths? NEWA has made it well past the 10-year mark at this point because folks like Julie and all of her colleagues who were involved with this before I started have really listened to grower needs in New York and have gone to great lengths to provide these services. And moving forward, I will certainly continue that tradition and hope to really take NEWA in some interesting new directions as well. So really, when we talk about NEWA's strength, it's it's not that it's just a website, or it's not that we have the best research available. Um, it's really, if you go back to our visual here, it's that we have figured out a way to take all of these different parts and create that synergy. Um, and ultimately, that's really made possible because the people involved, myself, but of course, everybody before me, um, you as growers, everybody wants to see this succeed, and so all these separate parts are working together to get that synergy. And I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. And just on this last slide, sometime after the 2019 growing season, NEWA is going to undergo some pretty significant changes. Now, we're not going to do this, one day to the next. Everything's going to be different. We're gonna have probably a soft launch. We'll keep. What I'd like to see is that with our rebuild, we'll keep the current site going. Um, and then we'll make the announcement that, hey, we are going to start a transition phase. It's going to involve training, probably a lot of online resources that I'll be working on, along with workshops at the conferences, a lot of stuff to be worked out still, but something to have on your mind. Uh, but it's really exciting because there's going to be a lot of new features if everything goes the way that we are expecting. The first being that you will be able to, if you wish, it's not required, it won't be required, but we're going to implement a user profile system so that if you, for example, go to use the fire blight model um, for a specific orchard block, say, we really want to be able to save the information that you're inputting. So if you put in a custom blossom date to start the model, it's going to be there the next time you log in. So you don't have to redo that every time. One of the pain points with our current system that we've gotten feedback on is that, oh, we always have to reset those biofix dates, and sometimes we forget. So little things like that kind of across the board, we've tried very, very hard to document, and we're working very hard to capture that in the rebuild. And so, yeah, a lot more like that after the 2019 growing season. So with that, that's my presentation. Obviously, you can't ask me questions, but I'm happy to take emails if you want. It's at the bottom. It's dlo6@cornell.edu. And I'll just leave this here for a second if you want to write that down. Or if you want to talk to Mike Bastow or Dan Donahue afterwards, I'm sure they'd be happy to pass any questions on, but please feel free to reach out to me directly. And with that, thank you very much. And I apologize that I could not be here this week to talk to you in person.